everyone, welcome to the February 29th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we are looking ahead to a big Saturday of racing action taking place across the country. We've got three major Derby preps taking place in New York, out in California, and in Florida, and that is going to be the focus of this week's podcast. Gulfstream's Saturday card, they've got a 14-race marathon card on tap. We're going to take a look at the late pick 5 sequence, which spans races 10 through 14, of course, ending with that grade 2 Fountain of Youth for the 3-year-olds. That's going to be a race that really decides how this Derby picture is going to take shape over the next couple of months, because a couple of the major players in Dornoch and Locht are supposed to be competing there, as well as a couple of up-and-coming horses that I think are pretty exciting potential participants in that race. So a lot to talk about just with regard to that Fountain of Youth, but this entire pick 5 sequence is just full of stakes races, all graded stakes. Begins with the Very One, then the Gulfstream Park Mile on the dirt, then a couple of turf stakes, the Canadian Turf and the Honey Fox, both going a mile, and then of course ending things with that Fountain of Youth. And Craig, I would say it's the kind of sequence where there are some favorites in certain legs that look fairly strong, but then there are some others that are just totally wide open.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kind of like this sequence. I think I actually have some opinions that I look forward to betting, even if individually. And I'm pretty sure it's a pick 5 I'm going to play, because I do like the way this scenario, the sequence sets up.
Now, before we get into the handicapping, we want to remind everybody, as we did on the Pacecast earlier this week, that it is tournament season at first, and the next big one is coming up, the Ultimate Betting Challenge on Saturday, March 2nd at Gulfstream, Santa Anita, and ExpressBet. The Ultimate Betting Challenge, or UBC, features every race at Gulfstream Park on Fountain of Youth Day and every race at Santa Anita on Big Cap Day, making it a true full-day coast-to-coast betting extravaganza. Buy-in is $6,000, of which $5,000 is your bankroll, and compete against players from around the country for massive cash prizes and NHC seats. First, we'll seed 4 NHC seats to the prize pool, and all cash entry fees will be distributed back as prizes. At 150 players, that's $150,000 in cash prizes, plus those 4 NHC seats. Play in the UBC on-site at Gulfstream and Santa Anita, or jump in online at ExpressBet. Head over to expressbet.com/tournaments for more information and to register to play. Well, a lot to dive into on this Gulfstream Saturday card, Craig. I mean, good card to have a contest around, because it's not just this pick 5 sequence. There are stakes throughout the day, and even the non-stakes events drew large competitive fields. So it's really a horse player's dream on Saturday at Gulfstream.
It sure is. Once again, I have a friend, Corey, that's playing in the contest. He's bugging me with questions, and I'm like, dude, I've only started with the pick 5. Get back to me later on all the other races. And they're all just so deep. Like I said, I think there's 9 stakes races, 8 of them graded. Just a really good card. It's one of those Saturdays where I'm probably going to just lock myself in a room and have the TV on, the computer on, the tablet on, because there's just racing everywhere at high levels.
Yeah, definitely a lot to follow this Saturday. We're going to focus in right now, though, on this late pick 5 sequence, and we're going to get straight into the handicapping with the 10th race. It is the Very One, the grade 3 event, going a mile and 3/8 on the turf for the fillies and mares. And, Craig, this is an interesting race because we've got a few horses coming out of the La Prévoyante from the prior month when they were competing on the undercard at the Pegasus World Cup. That one was going 1.5 miles, cutting back a furlong here to go the 11 furlong distance. However, the winner of that race, Alpha Bella, she's not returning in here. It was actually the beaten second choice, Arkali Kim, who is probably going to be the favorite in here. We're recording this pretty early, actually, on Wednesday afternoon, with this going to go out Thursday. So I haven't yet seen the morning lines for Gulfstream on Saturday yet, but it does feel like Arkali Kim is probably the horse to beat. So she feels like the right place to start in this race, Craig, because at least she's got that marathon distance experience, whereas some of the other horses that have competitive speed figures haven't gone this far before. They just run over conventional route trips. So Arkali Kim, she feels like the proven commodity in this race, but what did you make of her loss last time to that horse Alpha Bella, who actually was stretching out for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I thought she ran fine. She makes a lot of sense in here. She fits the race. And I guess you could make the argument that the 12 furlongs, maybe she got a little bit short legged and she ran better in the Long Island at 11 furlongs. She has won at 12 before, but in lesser company. I've got no problem with her. If she's the favorite, it's not like I love her. I think there's some other alternatives in here. It's a little tough not knowing what the price is going to be. I'm glad this race is first though, because I have a pretty good idea of the prices in some of the other legs. This one I'm a little more iffy. I judge her as a contender. I don't view her as any kind of standout.
Yeah, I know that she got put in a little bit tight in about the eighth pole, the final furlong of that La Prevoyante last time. I think there was a steward's inquiry taking a look at it, and there was no action taken. I thought it was some pretty good race riding on the part of the jockey of Alpha Bella to sort of put this horse in tight, because she pretty much had a clear path for the entire time, just was really in close to the rail, and seemed like R. Kelly Kim got a little discouraged not wanting to go on through, because typically she's a horse that does have a really strong finish to her, but she has gotten very fast paces in a few of her major victories, particularly 2 and 3 back, when it just seemed like those races really set up for her late run. And I thought that Jose Ortiz did a good job keeping her closer to a much more moderate pace last time, but she just lacked a little bit of that finish, not being so much with the flow of the race. And I start to look at some horses that finished right behind her, like Anatolian and even Highland Grace, and nothing against either one of them. They're both, improving horses. Highland Grace maybe a little more upside as a newly turned 4-year-old, now second off the layoff, but I don't know that I view either one of them as true graded stakes marathon types of horses on the turf. So I do question the quality of that race a little bit. And also remember, Romagna Mia, who was the favorite that day, was just a complete no-show. So it really made that race a little bit softer. So we'll see what we get from R. Kelly Kim here. But kind of like you, Craig, I didn't want to default to her at what I thought could be a relatively short price in this race. And you're sort of confronted with this question about what you do with some of these horses that do have some better speed figures that are stretching out in distance, like the number 5, Sister Luann, and even the number 7, Cairo Consort. How are you assessing them?
I think I'm glad you brought up the pace, because when you look at the pace projector for this race, I don't often put a lot of stock in the pace projector at this distance, but I'm really surprised this isn't a favors early. And I can't remember. Maybe we don't do it at this 11 furlong distance. I know we don't at 12. But it looks to me like Sister Luann is certainly going to have everything her own way on the front end. She comes out of the Pegasus Filly and Mare Turf, which was a pretty strong race won by Didia. And I can't dismiss her just because I think she's going to be on the front going so easily. I don't know if she can get a mile and 3/8, but if she's ever going to get it, it's going to be on this day, because when I look at the pace projector, like I often do, I look at the horse that's shown in second. It's the 9 horse in here, Angel Nadeshiko. And that one is one who, yeah, she went wire to wire last time going a mile and 1/8 at Santa Anita. It was pedestrian fractions at best. And when you look at the rest of her races, she's far from what I'd call a front runner. So I think Sister Luann's really dangerous in this spot, despite the stretch out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because those 2 runners that you mentioned, they're both trained by Saffie Joseph. So he can sort of decide which one he wants to send to the lead with the instructions to the jockeys. And I guess we'll see if they follow those instructions. But it does feel like Sister Luann is the naturally faster of the 2 horses, though perhaps Angel Nadeshiko is more of a need the lead type, because even though she doesn't always get the lead, she's achieved her best results when she's been able to get forward the few times that it's happened, including last time when she got really comfortable up front at that big price, 18-1, and was able to sprint away to hold on. I just don't know about the quality of Angel Nadeshiko against this field, because even though she won a grade 3 last time, that was a pretty weak group. We know that California older turf female division is just lacking at the moment, and that was probably even a weaker race than some others surrounding it on the calendar. So I just don't view her as good enough, but potentially she could press the pace a little bit. It just does feel like Sister Luann's going to have things go her way. I don't know how I feel about her stretching all the way out to a mile and 3/8. I don't really love the Frosteds going this far. The Dam, did attempt a marathon distance once. She was a horse that was trained by Chad Brown, and I think she was third in a stakes going a mile and a half, though most of her other races were just, typical mile and the 16th route distances. So mixed signals regarding Sister Luann going this far, but certainly if she gets a favorable pace setup, she could be tough to reel in this race. So I can't totally dismiss her. I mean, as for Cairo Consort, Craig, I'm a little more convinced that she's one that could stretch out further, just given her running style. I don't think she has to be quite as far back as she's been the last couple of times. She just got outrun from the early stages of that Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf and was actually trying to finish up the inside at the end, but just was given way too much to do and was so far out of position by the time they got to the quarter pole. She was just never a factor that day. She put in a decent late run two back in that Tropical Park Oaks, and she had shown some real ability going back to the early part of her 3-year-old season when she first came into the Todd Pletcher barn. And now she's third off that long layoff, so maybe she's cycling back into a better performance. And just watching her run and the way she finishes pretty strongly, I'm not going to be surprised if she's one that can close off the slower fractions if Irad Ortiz is able to place her in more of a stalking position, which I think he's going to have the option to do here.
Yeah, if I had to make a top pick in this race, it would be her. She was a horse that I actually liked a little bit in the Pegasus. She didn't run badly. She actually increased, ran a lifetime best TimeformUS speed figure, even though she wasn't competitive. But that was a much better race than what we're seeing here. And I agree with you. I think the mile and 3/8 should be right up her alley. She's shown third on the pace projector. And as I look through the field, I don't see any reason why she can't be there. I really have no idea what kind of price I'm going to get in this race. And the same with her. I doubt it would be that much given it's Todd Pletcher, it's Irad Ortiz. She's coming out of the grade 2, but I think she's a very strong contender in this race.
Yeah, I could see her going off as maybe the second choice. I guess there's a possibility she's favored here, though I do get the sense R. Kelly Kim is going to be the favorite, just given all of those victories at marathon distances. But there's another horse in this race, Craig, that I want to spend a little time on. If there was pace in this race, if I had any conviction that there was going to be a fair pace, I would love a horse in here, and that's the number 8, Miss Yearwood, because she's another horse that obviously wants the marathon distances. We saw 2 and 3 back when she was an impressive winner of a couple of races in Kentucky and an allowance race. And then that Kirtana where she beat a solid field. There were some good horses behind her like Lovely Princess and Sparkle Blue, who both have stakes credentials. And Miss Yearwood in those races just looked like a horse that was a different kind of filly going these marathon distances. Now, they brought her back off the layoff last time in that synthetic race, the Via Borghese, and she obviously was way behind Romagna Mia, who came back to run poorly in her next start. I'm not going to make too much of that. I'm guessing something went wrong with Romagna Mia for her to run so poorly in her next start. But I know Miss Yearwood's return result looks poor, and there's really no trouble comment, but go back and watch that race and try to tell me she had a fair chance at all, because the horses that were making moves were doing so outside in the clear, included among them Romagna Mia. And Chris Landeros was towards the inside when the race was starting to fall apart around the far turn, and he started to move up with Miss Yearwood very handily. She was really not being asked for anything, and she started to move up into traffic, and she just ended up getting herself in behind 2 tiring runners, and he just couldn't get himself out from behind, especially the horse who's also in here, the number 4, Viva La Red, and she just kind of got stuck behind that foe and lost all the momentum that she had built up, just kind of following that runner who was going backwards as they came into the stretch. And even once they got into the stretch, he just found himself in this pocket behind a trio of fading horses and just could never get out. And he basically just had to sit on her and not do anything for the final 3 furlongs of the race. So she didn't have any kind of fair chance that day. I'm convinced that she's a lot better than that right now. And now she's getting back on the turf into a spot that is her appropriate distance. It's just a matter of the trip and whether or not she's going to be able to get the right kind of pace set up, especially over a turf course like Gulfstream Park, where I think at a different kind of turf course, like at Keeneland or in New York per se, you could have some confidence that the stamina would just win out at the end, even if they don't go that quickly up front. But at Gulfstream, speed is so deadly on the turf. And if a horse gets comfortable, they just sprint through the lane. And the closers just have no chance to get into it through that short stretch run. So I'm a little bit concerned about that with Miss Yearwood, because otherwise I would really like her in this race.
Yeah, that would be my only concern with Miss Yearwood is just her complete lack of early speed. She has a 1 on the Timeform US early speed ratings. At most other tracks, I wouldn't be that concerned. Don't get me wrong, I do think she's a contender. Maybe some pace will develop, but at Gulfstream, I do think it's a pretty big question mark for her. That said, there's one more horse that I did want to mention, and it's almost exclusively because of a trainer stat, and that's the 3-horse Ready Lady. Not sure what kind of price she's going to be, but I would imagine it would be a pretty big price, so I want to have her on my pick 5 tickets. And that's because Roger Atfield does really well with these types of horses, going 11 plus furlongs in turf stakes races. It's not the hugest sample size you're ever going to see, but he's 6 for 19, 32% with a 2.88 ROI. He's done well at Gulfstream before in this particular race, so that's one I don't want to overlook. What is going to be a price.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought her up. I think she's kind of the one other horse that I would want to discuss in here, because she was starting to figure things out towards the end of last year. I mean, she went off at huge prices and some graded stakes up at Woodbine, and she ran okay in that Dance Smartly. That was a very slow paced race where really nobody could close at all, and she stayed on for third. And then she was just kind of overmatched in some tougher spots after that. She's only 5 years old, and it seemed like she was finally starting to come around at the end of her 4-year-old season. I like that you pointed that out about Roger Atfield. I was looking up some of his stats specifically at Gulfstream, and he doesn't win. He hasn't won that much recently at Gulfstream, but he actually is 8 for 79 on the turf at Gulfstream over the past 5 years with a $1.79 ROI, which is not some super positive stat, but I kind of expected it to be a lot worse than that, because you think of him as more of a Woodbine trainer that's not really serious about winning with a lot of these horses over the winter time. And just looking at her pedigree, her damn Lady Shakespeare was a really good turf horse, and one who seemed to run well going marathon distances. She won the New York at 10 furlongs, and she actually won the Bewitched going 1.5 miles towards the end of her career. So maybe Ready Lady is one that, as she's matured, these longer distances are going to be more to her liking. She's not my top pick in here, but she's one that I could see throwing in somewhere, because I do think she's going to be a fair price. And just kind of wrapping up Miss Yearwood, even though I have those concerns, Craig, just given the state of this race and the fact that the other horses I was considering are all shorter prices, or at least I think they're shorter prices, I still want to upgrade Miss Yearwood based on that trip observation, because I think that still is a little bit of an edge in my favor. And even if the trip doesn't work out, she's going to be the right price to find out if she gets the setup or not. So, or at least I believe she's going to be. So she's still one of my top picks in here, but it's a difficult race to have a whole lot of confidence in.
Yeah, it's one we'll talk about as we wrap up, but yeah, one I will definitely use more than a couple horses.
Let's move over to the dirt course and discuss the next race in this Pick 5 sequence. Race 11 is the Gulfstream Park Mile, Grade 2 event going the 1-turn mile distance. And we've got some of the main players coming out of that Fred Hooper from also from that Pegasus World Cup Day card, including the top 3 finishers from that race, Tumbarumba and Castle Chaos, 2 of them who finished in that very tight photo for the win. Tumbarumba back in here. And, Craig, looking at the pace projector for this race, you do kind of get the sense that Tumbarumba may have the edge over some of the common rivals coming out of that Fred Hooper, where horses like Castle Chaos and especially Steel Sunshine are just way more pace dependent than him. And there really isn't very much pace in this field at all.
No, it's a race where very rarely a 1-turn dirt race we get the no speed rating for this one. And as you look through the PPs, it's kind of hard to argue with that. We show 3 horses grouped on the front end, and Il Miracolo, Tumbarumba, and I believe it's Ticking. And none of them are horses that you would really consider front runners. They've all had their times where they're on up or near the lead, not particularly going off fast when doing so. So I think the pace projector really matters in this race. And Because of that, I was able to kind of eliminate, for me, at least a few of the horses who would be considered contenders. And the two horses I really wound up focusing on are two horses shown up near the front, and that's Tumbarumba and Il Miracolo. Both horses who have speed figures which are really competitive. They run right around the race rating of 119, and I could just see a race where those two are up on the front end, setting slow fractions, and are very tough to run down in the lane.
Yeah, I could see the same thing happening. I mean, neither one is really a front runner, and if I had to guess what was going to happen in this race, Craig, from a pace standpoint, I think that they're probably going to send the long shot ticking to the lead, and maybe Il Miracolo and Tumbarumba will just sort of let that one go and stalk that big price. Not that that's a bad thing for the 4 or the 5. I just expect that to happen because it feels like ticking might be a horse who would benefit more from going to the front than some of the others would, or at least being dead set on going to the front. So we'll see how that plays out, but it definitely is a race where it feels like the closers could be up against it. I mean, none more so than a horse like the number 3 Steel Sunshine, who got a fair pace to close into last time and was able to make that steady progress, picking his way through the pack. But here, while he does benefit slightly from the field being a bit shorter and there won't be quite as much kickback to deal with, I mean, he still feels like one that's going to have to launch from the back of the pack. And that's just a hard thing to do at Gulfstream, especially if they're not moving that quickly up front. So Tumbarumba, I respect this horse. I thought that he was an overlay last time at 8-1, and we talked about that on the forecast that week, and he was very game to get the job done. He just is that kind of horse where he knows how to get his nose on the wire first. I mean, he's been involved in several photo finishes over his career, and he comes out on the winning end almost every time when it's close at the end. So I mean, he just is a really game horse, and you saw it last time when he was able to fend off Castle Chaos. There was a little bit of bumping it upper stretch, but I don't think it was too consequential. Tumbarumba was just refusing to let Castle Chaos get by him that day. And I think Tumbarumba's pace versatility makes him really tough in this race, because it probably didn't come up quite as tough as that Fred Hooper, just from a depth standpoint. And I guess it really depends on what you get from the number 4, Il Miracolo, who has been knocking heads against tougher competition for most of the past year. Hasn't won that many races along the way, but I think that's just due to the company that he's been keeping. He ran really well 3 back in the Fayette when he was sort of put in a tight spot in the stretch and kept battling on. The Clark, I'm not going to hold that against him. It was another solid effort against tough horses. And then last time in the Pegasus World Cup, I mean, a mile and an eighth is okay for this horse, but I don't think anybody wants to go a mile and eighth chasing the kind of fast pace that he was. I mean, National Treasure just freaked that day, being able to stalk that fast pace and then keep on going in a race that otherwise completely fell apart behind the winner. And Il Miracolo stayed on pretty well to finish 6th, beating over half the field. And we saw that race come back strong with, of course, Senor Buscador winning overseas last weekend. So Il Miracolo makes a lot of sense, and I'm not too worried about the turn back to a mile, Craig, especially given the pace situation here. What you'd normally be afraid of with a horse turning back from a mile and an eighth to a mile is that they're not going to have the speed to stay with the leaders early, and they could get badly outrun. I don't foresee that happening to Il Miracolo here.
No, that's a good point about the pace. If this was a race with the fast red flag, maybe you're a little worried that he drops 10, 12 lengths off of it, but can't really see that happening here. And I like the point you made about ticking, and I actually think that would probably be a good thing for the two horses that I like in here, because one thing that's always a question mark is if you take horses out of their running natural running style, is how they will adjust to that. And if he goes to the front, you really won't have to concern yourself with it too much. So for me, most likely, I'm just sticking with those two horses trying to get through this leg. It'll depend how my ticket shapes up. I mean, Castle Chaos, maybe he gets a good trip from the inside, but it's not like he has no speed. He was up fairly close in the Cigar Mile, so I wouldn't want to totally dismiss him. But my 2 A's would definitely be Il Miracolo and Tumbarumba.
Yeah, I'm also a little bit more down on Castle Chaos here, even though the decision, the difference between he and Tumbarumba last time was just a nose. Castle Chaos, he's just the kind of horse that he got really good out of nowhere for a little while, and he's coming into this race in top form by all accounts, but I just wonder how long he's going to hold this form for, because he really was on a good rhythm heading into that Fred Hooper. He was consistently working since the Cigar Mile. Now, since the Hooper, it took him almost a month to get back on the work tab, and he just put in one really slow 4 furlong drill. And I wonder if they're just kind of getting to the end of the line with him a little bit. I mean, he sort of came off this really long layoff, cycled up to his best, and I wonder if now we're going to sort of be on the other side of the hill with Castle Chaos. And also, I don't love that Tyler Gaffalione has jumped off him. I don't know the reason. Tyler Gaffalione is seemingly getting off Castle Chaos to be on a long shot here. Maybe there was some uncertainty about whether or not Castle Chaos was going to make this race, especially given that work tab. So I'm just kind of inferring that maybe Castle Chaos is not going to run quite as well as the last couple of starts. And also, he was huge prices twice in a row and he hit the board, and now he's going to be a much lower price after the form is kind of exposed. So I never think that's the right time to jump on a bandwagon with a horse. There is one more horse in this race I want to talk about, Craig, that I'm kind of on the fence about. I was starting to come around and really like him in this race, and then I was almost starting to pump the brakes when I was finishing handicapping, because I've never been this horse's biggest fan. But the number 2, Wit, getting back on the dirt, going a little bit longer. I wonder if he's a horse that maybe they gave up on him going a mile on the dirt a little prematurely when he was a youngster, because going all the way back to his one attempt at this distance in the Champagne, he really didn't run that badly. I mean, Jack Christopher, nobody was beating him that day. He was one of the most talented 2-year-olds of 2021. And Witt was just a little far back, had to, gotten some mild traffic coming to the quarter pole and just sort of stayed on mildly, but it was a solid speed figure compared to his prior numbers. And then he came back and, ran a good effort off the layoff in the Bayshore. And soon after that, they just decided they were going to make him into a turf horse. And personally, for me, I never loved him on the turf. He ran fine a number of times. He was probably about as talented on the turf as he was on the dirt. But they put him back on the dirt last time over a sloppy track in that Belmont turf sprint. Not by design, it was rained off the turf, but I thought he actually ran really well in that race. He was sort of always being worked upon, out of position early. It's not like it was a race where the speed came back at all. It was wired on the front end by today's flavor, but Witt just kept on chugging along and trying, and he was really making up ground quickly across the wire. And it sort of made me wonder if perhaps 6 furlongs on the dirt is a little short for this horse, and the 1-turn mile might be right up his alley these days, and they just kind of haven't really focused on it since he was much, much younger. So maybe this is the right spot for him. I just wonder what kind of price he's going to be, because it is Irad and it's Todd Pletcher, and this is a horse that can be popular. I'd want like 5 or 6 to 1 on him, and I don't know I'm going to get it.
That was my concern with him as well. I mean, I think he's okay. He could win, but I've already spread in one race. This is a race where I was kind of iffy. I kind of like the 2 that I mentioned. Sometimes you just got to draw a line, and I just don't think this horse is going to offer any value. And so for that reason, I didn't use him on my ticket. And I kind of had a similar experience with Gilmore. He was a horse I really wanted to make a case for, because speed figure wise, he was a horse who, if you went back to his 3-year-old season, he ran some races that would fit here. And I think you could probably make some excuses for both of his first 2 races this year and think that maybe he's going to be a contender here, drawing a decent outside post, but I just couldn't quite get there. I went and watched this Hooper. There was a little bit of trouble early, but he just really did no running, and it's tough for me to take a horse like that. And I also don't think it's like he's going to be some huge price in here either.
Yeah, he's the horse that Tyler Gaffalione actually jumped off to get on for this race. Not that I think that means too much. Yeah, he ran some big speed figures in the middle of last year. It just feels like his recent form makes him a little tough to like in this race, but I also was giving him some consideration before ultimately going in a different direction. So it sounds like we're kind of on a similar page here, Craig, concentrating on those 2 runners, the 4 and the 5, drawn towards the middle of the gate. Though I do want to use Witt. I'm going to be a little more positive on him than I think you are. I think there's a chance that he's at least in that decent price range, 9 to 2, 5 to 1, just given the fact that others are coming in good form off a good effort at a very similar distance in the Fred Hooper, and maybe Witt's a fair price. So at least for this leg, you do get to see the double probables, yes, I should say, from leg 1. So you can get some sense of what price these horses are going to go off, whereas a little bit later in the sequence, we'll be blind in that regard.
Yeah, I was going to make exactly that point, that I would be checking the double probables to see if I can get a decent estimate what he will be.
Let's move on to race 12, the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence. It is the grade 3 Canadian turf going the mile and a 16th distance on the turf. And Craig, I don't know about you. I thought this was the most difficult race of the entire sequence, maybe the most competitive stakes of the day at Gulfstream on Saturday, because all of these horses are coming in with very similar speed figures. Almost all of them have tried, grade 2 and grade 3 company at some point, and many of them have run well. It's a race that seems at least like it could be fair from a pace standpoint. So it's not like anybody is just completely out of it from a running style or race dynamic standpoint. I found myself making positive cases for a lot of horses, probably for too many horses.
I can see that. It is a tough race. I agree with you. I think it's the toughest race of the sequence by far. I said I would spread in the first leg a little more, but I found this one a little more difficult to make decisions on. And I guess I'll just start maybe kind of go in post position order and how we feel about the horses. And the first one that really kind of jumped out at me is a horse who's shown on a clear early lead, and that's Saratoga Flash, the one horse. Now, it's a race where we don't have any kind of flag on the pace projector, but at Gulfstream, that's always kind of a dangerous thing. But I found myself eventually siding on the more negative side of this horse. Granted, his 2 races since the layoff have come over a synthetic surface, one that maybe he doesn't like quite as much. He did one on synthetic before on an off the turf race, but not with a great speed figure. But what really jumped out at me is this is a race that has a race rating of 124, so a good solid grade 3. And I just don't think this horse is that good. He has one figure that matches it that came at Kentucky Downs. We've talked about that course many times. I believe when he won it was when the track was really favoring speed. But regardless of whether it was or not, figures just don't often translate there. And for me, when I look at all the rest of the races, he's pretty significantly lacking. So I wound up basically deciding not to use this one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's a horse that we should touch upon. I didn't really view him as a contender in this race, Saratoga Flash. I mean, I know speed is dangerous at Gulfstream. It just felt like he would have at least some pressure towards the front end from Giant Game, as long as Giant Game runs here. I think that's important to point out. Giant Game is cross-entered on Friday at Tampa Bay Downs, actually in another turf race, a turf allowance race. So they clearly want to try him on the turf. It's just a matter of whether or not they do it here. This could be an ambitious spot for him, though he's a horse I want to talk about separately in a little bit. But if he comes out, that would make Saratoga Flash the lone speed, because I don't really see horses like Smoke and Tea, or especially not the number 10, I Shuck a Lot, who is somehow shown fourth on the pace projector, as going after this horse. So if the number 9 comes out, Craig, I think that makes Saratoga Flash way more dangerous. I still just have trouble viewing him as good enough because, like you said, that one big effort at Kentucky Downs is just, where did that come from? That you might remember, that was that National Thoroughbred League race where like all the horses wore the silks of the league members. I think that was the one race that was conducted last year for that. And I don't know what was going on with this horse that day, but he showed up like he was a completely different animal. He went fast early, went fast late, and was just always in front of that field, just kind of running a hole in the wind. He hasn't looked like that since then. He didn't look like that before the race. So I don't know where that version of Saratoga Flash came from. But if he can get back to anything close to that form, I suppose he is a dangerous gate to wire threat, even though he's really not my kind of horse. But I do think we have to at least discuss that possibility that the 9 scratches.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, we might as well just jump to him since he's shown second on the pace projector. When I looked up his pedigree, I know I don't go as deep as you do. I just looked at the siblings, and he has a decent family. He's isotherm, won a good amount of money, won a couple graded turf stakes, but didn't have the most inspiring record. And his other sibling, who's done well, I didn't write her name down, had most of her success on dirt. It looks like he's bred for turf. The TimeformUS rating is pretty high, a 92. I am always just concerned when a horse takes this long. It almost feels to me like they've run out of hope on the dirt. He hasn't performed well trying better class dirt horses, and seems like they're just taking a shot. But I don't want to totally rule him out because there does appear to be some turf breeding to me.
Yeah, I think this horse could really like the turf. Like you pointed out, he's that half to isotherm. Isotherm was a lawn row, and lawn row is much more of a a confirmed turf influence with a little less versatility than this horse's sire, Giant's Causeway, who obviously is also an excellent turf sire, but Giant's Causeway also gets plenty of good dirt horses, and Giant Game is a good dirt horse. He probably only has to run about as well as his top on the dirt to be successful here on the turf. But I am a little concerned about some of those negatives that you mentioned, Craig, that he clearly was never really thought of as a turf horse early on. I mean, they just entered him in nothing but dirt races. And a big function of that is that he was on the Derby Trail for a while. He was third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I mean, he accomplished some things on the dirt, so there was really no reason to look elsewhere. But he did have a disappointing performance in the Clark, and now they're just clearly looking to try something new with a very well-bred horse. Watching him run, I think he's going to like the turf. I remember making this note about him all the way back when I was like handicapping him in Derby preps back in 2023, that like he kind of has that action, like turf is going to work for him. But Dale Romans really doesn't have good numbers doing this. First time turf with non-maidens. I looked it up in Formulator, 16 starters, 0 even hitting the board. So there are a lot of negatives with this horse. Even though I think that he kind of has the pedigree and physical makeup to like the turf, I can't get overly excited about him. He's one that I could include somewhere. And, if I'm playing this race vertically, I could, use him in some bets, and I could even use him as a B or a C if I'm playing a pick 5 sequence, because I think he's going to be a huge price if he runs in here, despite his accomplishments. It's hard. I feel like I fall for horses like this a lot and am disappointed with them more often than not. So I want to kind of stop myself from falling in love with this horse too much, even though I think he's going to like the surface.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of how I had a feel. I want to like him, but it's just so many races, and I get why they kept him on dirt. But when I look through his PPs, we show in TimeformUS all the workouts of this horse's whole career. He's never even once worked out on the turf, unless he has since February 21st, which is our last one showing. If he's going to be a huge price, I could see maybe using him as a C, but I'm pretty skeptical, especially given Dale Roman's trainer stats, as you note. I guess we should talk about a couple horses that we actually do like in here. I'll start with one I didn't want to like when I first went through here, and that's the 3-horse Emmanuel, just because it's Todd Pletcher, it's Irad Ortiz. I know I probably won't get the best of it at the betting windows, but what really struck me is how well this horse has ran off of a long layoff before, and also first time out of the gate, which I almost consider like a long layoff. This horse won his for the first 2 races of his career, tailed off a little bit. Then he came back off a 6-month layoff, won a couple graded stakes at Tampa and Gulfstream, seemed to tail off just a little bit. Now he's coming off a similar 6-month layoff, and this horse has the speed figures to fit. It's just a matter of, do you think he'll be ready? And looking at the workouts I see, it looks like he probably will be ready. So I don't want to dismiss him at all. He's a horse that I think has a big chance in here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He was not my top pick. I don't think he's going to be the best value in this race, but I'm not going to be surprised at all when Emmanuel wins or runs very well in here, because he's got the credentials. And like you said, he ran really well off a very similar layoff in that Tampa Bay back in February of 2023, and held that form for a good while until, just really putting in that poor effort in the 4-star Dave. And obviously something went wrong that day because he was off for the rest of the season after that. But this just feels like a logical spot for him to come back. He's got a versatile running style where Irad can really place him anywhere. I've watched his workouts for the comeback. He's actually been the workmate of Witt. That's kind of why I watch the workouts more so for Witt. But I mean, I noticed that this horse was going really well with Witt, arguably, maybe slightly better in a couple of the drills. So, I mean, that's just a really good sign, especially for this horse who has that turf inclination. I think he makes a lot of sense in here. I'm using him. He's not my only use. This is more of a spread race for me, but he'll be on my tickets. Craig, a horse that I am going to downgrade a little bit that I get looks kind of appealing on paper is the 6, Atone. He's got like a trouble line for his last race where it says he was stymied at the rail. He got an absolutely perfect trip in the Pegasus World Cup. There was no trouble in that race. He was following the winner around the far turn, had a clear run in the stretch, and just basically scooted up the inside. I mean, he couldn't have gotten a better ride from Asian Murphy. And he ran well that day. He got back to one of his better speed figures, but everything worked out for him in there. And yeah, this is a slightly easier spot, but I mean, it's still a pretty competitive field. And I don't totally trust this horse. He's only been successful when he gets those perfect trips, and is he going to get two of them in a row? I don't know. So I wanted to look elsewhere. Actually, a horse that interests me quite a bit that I think is another one that's just super logical in this race, and maybe it'll be a decent price, is the number 5, Siege of Boston, who it took him a while to actually try Stakes Company. He sort of, worked through his maiden and allowance conditions. Jimmy Toner just took his time with him, but he stepped up in that Kentucky Downs preview and going 1.25 miles, that could be a little far for him, but he ran pretty well that day. Then he ran into that version of Saratoga Flash that we haven't seen since then at Kentucky Downs, and actually ran fine to be second. And then his 2 starts since then, I don't think he's gotten ideal trips either time, breaking from post 11 in the River City and getting a wide trip that day. I would actually rather take him as opposed to Smoke and Tea out of that race. And then last time in that Tampa Bay, I mean, he was towards the back early, again at a wide draw, just was forced to go to the back, tried to make a middle move in there between horses, had to wait, didn't get into the clear until the very late stages of that race, and was actually finishing best of all at the end. I don't mind the rider upgrade to Jose Ortiz, and I just think he makes a whole lot of sense in this race.
Well, unfortunately for our listeners, we're kind of on the same page on both those horses. I say unfortunately because maybe they want a little more diversity, but I'm going to read you my note on a tone that I made, and it's a tone, tough to trust, perfect trip last out. Running line looks better than the replay. Because when you watch the replay, I mean, he had everything go his own way. He looked like he got a clear run up the rail, and he just got blown by 2 horses. So it's one of those turf speed figures that I just don't trust it. It was perfect trip. It was almost like if you're a harness racing guy, just kind of a suck up figure where he didn't really do any running. So I want no parts of a tone in here. He won't be on my tickets because I just think he's going to get overbet. And Siege of Boston, my notes were 2 really tough trips. He's run good speed figures anyway. And I think that last race at Tampa is really worth watching. He's just kind of floating on the outside for a while, uncovered. He was wide around the first turn. Just nothing really went right. And the pace wasn't all that quick. A couple of the fractions are coated in blue. Now, when the race did slow down, he did kind of make a good move, but he also then got stymied a little bit in the lane, and he still came running. So he's a horse that I just think is really dangerous in here. My only real concern is I wonder about the pace, and maybe there'll be a lack of speed again, but he was able to get himself into the race more early. So I think he's got a big shot, and he would definitely be my top pick.
Yeah, that's my big concern with Siege of Boston too. And he would not quite be my top pick in this race. There's another horse I want to talk about, but I mean, I think he makes a lot of sense in here. It's just the pace is a real sticking point for me, because especially if the 9 Giant Game scratches, it makes it especially tough on Siege of Boston, who could be trying to close from maybe last. I mean, under the 7's also a deep closer, but showed a little more tactical speed in his most recent start. But I just wonder how aggressive Jose Ortiz is going to be. He's not the kind of jockey that is always, hustling out of the gate to get early position on a horse like this. So I just wonder if he's going to be coming too late once again, which has been a theme recently for Siege of Boston. But I do think he's got the ability. He's as talented as anybody in this race. Anybody else you wanted to talk about, Craig? I mean, we didn't talk about a couple of logical horses in here, like Smoke and Tea and Ice Shock a lot. I probably like one of them a little more than the other, but do you have feelings on those two?
No, out of those 2, I mean, I guess I would prefer Smoke and Tea. I will definitely use Smoke and Tea because I think he's decent. Ice Shock a lot didn't do a whole lot for me. The outside post, coming out of weaker races, maybe you see it a little differently, but he's just not for me. I don't think those races in Canada were all that strong last year. He's good. It's hard for me to see him getting a good trip over the Gulfstream course. That said, I'll turn it back to you. There is one more horse I want to talk about, but I think we maybe want to talk about the same one. So let's see which two you're thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, of the two, I'd probably prefer I Shock a lot a little bit more because he does have some of those better races going 2 turns, even though he's been a turf sprinter for most of his career. I thought he ran really well in both the Kelso and the 4-star Dave last summer at Saratoga. I just worry about the trip a little bit from the outside post being a horse that doesn't have a whole lot of speed, but he does have a rider on his back who will look will look at the pace scenario and try to ride for position. So maybe that pace projector is a little more accurate than you might think looking at this horse's running style, that I Shock a lot could be ridden forwardly in this race. I'm not going to discount that. But the horse that I overlooked at first, and then as I was kind of going back on through this race to sort of decide who I liked and who I didn't like, I gave him a second look. And that's the number 4 Turf King, who is the Chad Brown trainee in this race. On speed figures, he's not competitive, but it is Chad Brown taking a shot in a graded stakes off a layoff, which I think you always have to pay attention to. And that alone, that angle is going to attract some money this horse's way. I don't think he's going to be, some huge price like he would be for a different trainer. People respect Chad Brown when he places a horse ambitiously. But watching back some of this horse's races, I just really like his attributes, his mental attributes. He's a real fighter. And you see it in a few of his replays that it looks like he's beaten and then he comes back for the victory. We saw it last time at Woodbine. We saw it in that race at Keeneland back in April of last year, where he actually was beating a very good horse and more than looks. More than looks ran the better race that day from an overall trip standpoint. But Turf King was really game to fend him off in the late stages. And, he got one class test last year in the Jersey Derby, and on paper it looks really disappointing given that he was 5-2 and he was beaten by Bapio and Talk of the Nation. Talk of the Nation's a good horse. Bapio maybe didn't quite go on after that, but it looks like it's a really disappointing performance. And then I went back and watched that race, and he really was given no chance by the jockey. There were a couple of speed horses that were kind of going the wrong way around the turn. And I guess Nick Juarez just got it in his head that he was going to be cute and split those horses. And the split just never really came. And he sort of had to lose momentum and wait behind horses while Bapio and Talk of the Nation, Talk of the Nation was up front, but Bapio just went by him in that clear path on the outside around the far turn. And once Turf King finally found room in about the 8th pole, he was really finishing at the end. It was trying to catch those two, but it's like the jockey never gave him the opportunity to use that determination that he has to go and catch a horse because he was in that traffic spot at the top of the stretch. So I think he's better than that loss makes it look. And now he's coming off the layoff in this ambitious spot. I mean, he's a 3-time winner, so it's not like Chad can put him in some allowance race. I mean, those N3Xs don't come up that often. So I'm sure that there aren't that many different options to run a horse like this aside from running in a stakes race. But I still think it's a pretty good sign to try a spot like this. And he's by Kingman. And if you've been following Chad Brown, he likes to give these progeny of Kingman time to develop. I don't know what it is about that sire in particular, but a lot of the ones that he's had, they've gotten better much later in their careers. And a lot of them have had long layoffs at different points earlier in their careers. So I feel like it's likely that we haven't yet seen the best of Turf King. And that's going to have to be the case for him to do well in this race. But I ended up liking him a lot more than I thought I would in this spot.
Okay, I did nail it. I got the right horse. And I will say, I know I've talked about it a little on Twitter. Part of it last week, you inspired me to start watching more races after the Will Take It spiel that you gave, which turned out to be dead on. And I spent more time watching that race. And the one disappointing race is I saw exactly what you did. It was not a good trip for him. I think you can put a line through it. And I don't want to put a whole lot of stock in those speed figures either at the time, because, I mean, he was just a 3-year-old. He's nearly a year, maybe 9 months older than, and I would expect him to be able to run 10 or 15 points faster if he gets a good trip. So I'm not going to quite put him on the same tier. I have Siege of Boston or Emmanuel. He'd be more like a B for me, but I can certainly see him running well in this spot. And he might get overlooked a little bit because of those speed figures, even being a Chad Brown.
No, I thought somebody who commented on that tweet that you very nicely put out this week about our podcast from last week was really just captured everything perfectly when he said, the biggest edge these days is just taking that time to watch the trips, because there's no algorithm that's going to analyze the video of a race and find a horse that had a trip, or the kind of trip that you want to find as a race watcher. Maybe one day we'll develop AI that can do that, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist just yet. And as a human being, not a computer team, I think the best edge that you could get for yourself is to watch a trip and just find some observation that other people aren't stumbling upon, and really use that as your edge when you're playing. It takes a while to hone that skill, being able to pick up on those things that you can observe from watching trips. But if you keep watching races over and over again, you'll start to notice things that can be really useful in your handicapping, and start to learn things about the different horses. Just watching them over and over again, the same horse in their replays, you'll start to learn about their attributes and what kind of situations they really need to be in to be successful. And those observations will inform your handicapping and make you get better at it over time. So just kind of wanted to give that. I know this is the TimeformUS podcast where we talk about, TimeformUS data primarily, but I wanted to kind of give that pitch for watching trips, because it really is the biggest edge you can have as a handicapper.
Yeah, I agree. And it puts a lot of perspective on speed figures. I'm the guy that makes all the speed figures, or most of them, at TimeformUS, along with one other guy. But speed figures don't tell the whole story. And as I've started to pay more and more attention, sometimes after all these years of doing it, you get a little bit lazy. And this is no knock on the Equibase guys, but running lines and charts don't come close to telling the whole story either. Watch the races, use the notes function in both TimeformUS or Formulator, and then you don't have to keep watching the races. If you input those notes, they can keep showing up in your PPs. And it's one thing I've kind of made a promise to myself that I'm going to take more advantage of.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, Craig, and I think we're getting chatty again, so I better move this along. Let's get to the next race, the 13th. It is the Grade 3 Honey Fox. Same distance, a mile on the turf, this time for the fillies and mares. And I'm going to cut right to the chase with this one, Craig. I kept looking at this race, trying to find a clever angle, and this race just feels like it sets up perfectly for one horse in particular, and the pace projector kind of points it out. There's a fast pace. Looking at the form of these horses, I believe it. I think there's going to be a fast pace in this race. Too many of them need the lead. And the number 6 Chili Flag just kind of sticks out in here, because she's a closer who's got a strong late kick on her. And watching back, speaking of trips, watching back that Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf last time, I don't know about you, but I didn't think she ever had a real fair chance in that race. Flavien Prat did his best to try to find a clear path for her in the stretch. He wheeled her outside pretty early around the far turn, trying to get there. It just looked like she never was fully clear in the lane, but she still was trying to run on at the end. And that was just a better race than this. And now she's going to get a good setup. I think she's going to be the favorite in here, but I also think she's far and away the most likely winner.
No argument for me. I think the pace is fast. My note says fast pace, and then in big capital letters with exclamation points. I agree with the pace projector, because I just don't see any other way this race plays out, barring a bunch of scratches. And Chili Flag would definitely be my top pick in here. I am going to talk about 2 horses. There's one other that I want to use, but I think you covered Chili Flag fine. I think she's going to run well. It's not like she's some deep closer who, even though she's shown pretty far back in the pace projector, she's shown tactical speed in her career. I don't think she has to be way back there. And even if she is, I don't think it's a terrible thing given the way I envision this scenario. So she'd be an A for me. The other filly that I don't want to totally overlook, and I'd probably use as a B, is Spansive, who I just think had a tough trip last time. Things didn't go her way. It's second time off the layoff for Todd Pletcher. She drew an outside post, didn't get a lot of cover. It was one of those weird 7.5 furlong races, which I've yet to be able to figure out the fractions sometimes, but it had 2 blue fractions. And I like the way she ran on at the end. And I'm also sure that she'll be coming. So this is a race that I'm using. I'll definitely be playing vertically, but most likely I'm only going too deep in here. And that's Chili Flag and Spansive.
Yeah, I agree with your observation on Spansive. Of the horses coming out of that January 27th optional claimer, she would be the one that I want. I guess my one concern with her is that she did her best running up on the front end. And once again, she's not getting the lead in here because there are just too many faster horses. But she did show that ability to close last time, and you're completely right. I mean, she was never inside 3 to 4 wide around the track, and that's a really tough thing to do at Gulfstream Park. So I think she's probably going to run better, especially breaking from more of an inside post this time. I don't know if she's as good as Chili Flag, but she does have more upside as that lightly raced 4-year-old. So she's definitely one that I could use. I wasn't sure what to do with the number 5 walkathon, Craig, because she had everything her own way last time in that endeavor. Got to set a rated pace, and really nobody was able to close from the back of the pack that day. And there are probably some horses that just disappointed in that spot. But I also kind of was reassessed. I think we talked about the race on the Pacecast when we were doing a recap, and it wasn't one that I handicapped ahead of time, but I was sort of looking back and assessing her and sort of kicking myself for not handicapping that race, because I feel like Walkathon is the kind of horse I would have liked in that spot, watching her trip in the Suwannee River, because she really didn't have a good go of it that day. She was just put into a 4-wide position on the far turn, trying to make this wide run in a race that was really more dominated towards the front end. And she actually ran well to be fourth in that spot. It's just, what do you do with a horse that was trip compromised 2 back, then got a perfect trip last time, and probably is going to get bet more on that perfect trip? So I feel like I kind of missed the opportunity with her.
I felt the same way. And she's also a horse it's really conflicting, because I mean, she won last time wire to wire. You wonder how much they want to change tactics, but then I see Julian Leparoux in the saddle, and I know he's not going to get very aggressive. She's been versatile before, winning from off the pace, but horses aren't machines. When I see her win wire to wire last time, I just have a feeling it won't be as easy to take her back off and make a run. And even if they do, how far back is she going to go, and how fast is the pace going to be? So she was a filly, or I guess she's a mare now, where it just feels like last time was the time. She's probably going to be overbetting here, and she wasn't for me.
I'm going to throw out one more horse, Craig, that is not my top pick because she's a little crazy, but I think she's going to be a big price in here. And she's one that I'll fool around with, especially if I'm playing this race vertically. I could key her in tries with Chili Flag, or potentially in some exactas, but she's not an A horse for my pick 5, but she's probably one I could use as a B or C. That's the number 8 Mohawk Trail, who looks pretty overmatched on speed figures. But I'm going back to look at some of this horse's previous races, and it's been a while since she's found herself in a race with pace. She is one of the few in here, actually, that likes to rally from off the pace. That's her running style. For a race with as much pace as there is, there aren't that many confirmed closers in here. And I thought she ran pretty well on a number of occasions last year, despite going off at big prices almost every time. Going all the way back to this time last year when she was a 3-year-old, I thought she ran well in that Sanibel Island. She didn't save as much ground as some others in there. And then she got a very slow pace to close into, or come from just off the pace in that alley wow up at Woodbine, and did well to get up for the victory that day. She beat some decent horses in the Ontario Colleen, and then last time, what chance did she have trying to close into that very slow pace at Kentucky Downs sprinting? She's gone a little shorter than this for some of her recent starts, but I think the mile is just fine for her. And who's to say that she could not have taken a step forward in the interim, maturing from a 3-year-old to a 4-year-old coming off the layoff? It seems like she's working sharply, coming back for Kelsey Danner, who I think does a good job, even though Kelsey Danner is having sort of a rough Gulfstream meet. It's probably just going to inflate the price on a horse like this. So again, not my top pick, but in a race where I was struggling to find any value, she was kind of it for me.
Yeah, she's going to be a big price. I did give her a look, particularly the way she closed into some blue fractions. And really, I like Spansive. Her speed figures around the same time of year aren't that far off of that one. I couldn't quite get there personally. I could see using her in vertical bets, and will consider that for sure. But I wanted to keep my ticket reasonable, so I didn't include her. But I certainly can see the case.
Yeah, because there are others in this race that could take money that I just weren't doing it for me, like Be My Sunshine, Candy Light, I've just seen enough of, and even Ancient Peace on the outside. I mean, she's got a race in her that makes her good enough, but what kind of trip is she going to get from all the way out there unless they're really aggressive, which could backfire in this race? So I just kind of kept coming back to Chili Flag being the most likely winner, as I think you did too.
Yes, for sure.
Well, let's finish up this podcast with the last race of the day, the last race of this Pick 5 sequence, race 14. It is the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth, mile and a 16th distance, which does have that short stretch run. I don't like this distance. I think it's really annoying that they run so many races under this configuration at Gulfstream, but it's just what they do. I'd much rather see these races be a mile and an eighth. But that point aside, this is what we're given for this Fountain of Youth, and at least it's not this huge field. You've got 9 runners signed on, so maybe it won't be as hard to work out a trip in this race. Let's talk first about the 2 favorites, Craig, which I think are going to be the number 5 Dornoch and the number 8 Locked, both of whom are among the top contenders for the Kentucky Derby at this very early stage. And I'm excited to see what each of them does here. I mean, wagering aside, I'm a fan of both of these horses. I think that they both showed real talent as 2-year-olds, and they feel like the types that could continue to develop as nice 3-year-olds because they've got the pedigrees and they've got the right styles to keep getting better with added distance. So I'm intrigued to see what we get from each of these horses. You do, though, have to make a decision at the end of the day. Who do you want to bet today in this spot? And for me, it was kind of a tough call between them because I think there are positive things to say about both of them. Before I get to my preference, how were you viewing Dornoch and Locked? And do you agree with me that they're like the center of this race?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I imagine they'll take the most money for sure. We can talk about the horses coming out of the Fast Maiden race after, but you kind of summed it up. I don't like this 1.16 distance. I think there's no reason they can't run this at 1.125, but because they do, I think that gives a huge advantage to Dornoch in a race like this. He just is a much more versatile, seems like a little more of an athletic horse to me, whereas this is the kind of setup that a horse like Locked, I'm almost always going to toss in a spot like this. And it's maybe he'll run huge and maybe he'll beat me. He's going to be a short price, and I don't want to use both of them on my ticket. And I just think the configuration gives Dornoch a huge advantage. It's not that I don't think Locked is a really good horse. I do, but, he's coming off of even a longer layoff than Dornoch. And it's just I've seen it too many times with horses with his running style like Gulfstream in races like this in the Holy Bull. And it scares me to take a short price. So of the 2, I would definitely toss Locked and go with Dornoch as my A.
I don't think that this race could possibly feature the kind of slow pace that we saw in the Holy Bull. I mean, maybe I'll eat my words because I didn't necessarily think that race was going to feature that slow of a pace either. But they really crawled up front for that race and made it impossible to close into it. But assuming this field holds together, which is a big assumption to make because there are 2 horses that are cross-entered in another race on Friday, if it holds together, they kind of have to be moving up front because both Speakeasy and Victory Avenue, and even La Dame Bro, who you should not discount as a potential pace player, I mean, they're all drawn alongside each other inside, and they kind of have to go for position in this race. So I feel like they could at least be moving up front. And I guess the one concern with Dornoch, Craig, is that he probably will have to rate in here. Not that he can't rate, but his 2 big victories last time and the time before, the Remsen and that maiden win, they were earned leading on the front end almost every step of the way. And he did not seem to like rating when he last tried it in the Sapling. I mean, I thought he ran by far the best race that day, but it was not a good trip. I mean, he broke a little slowly, rushed up, was getting way too keen in the early stages, sort of tugged Kendrick Carmouche up to contest the pace there, and then kind of paid the price for those antics early by getting tired at the end. But I mean, still battled onto the wire. Dornoch is a super game horse, and he really tries to win. And we saw that determination last time in the Remsen when Sierra Leone blew past him, and Dornoch, who was again kind of his own worst enemy, like hanging on his left lead and bumping into the rail. I mean, he's got some quirks to iron out, but when he's got his mind on running, Dornoch arguably is the most naturally talented horse in this field. So I kind of agree he's the horse to beat, Craig, but I have a little bit of that concern about how fast the pace could be for him, especially coming off this layoff where they probably don't want to get a super hard race into him. And also, what do you make of that greenness that we saw from him last year? Because it wasn't just the Remsen. I mean, he was also, you'll remember his maiden win. He was on his left lead the entire stretch. And even though he was drawing away so easily, he didn't look the prettiest doing it. And, I already summed up the Sapling. He was a real goofy horse last year.
He was for sure, and I actually think that more speed in here might help him. Maybe I'm crazy to think that, but I could see a scenario where he's laying third behind a couple of the faster horses early and gets a good outside trip. And this is a race where I believe the stretch is shorter. If I'm not, you can correct me. And I just have trouble seeing anybody running him down now. I guess there's always a possibility the horses like Speakeasy or Victory Avenue are just that good. The speed figures certainly would seem to indicate it if they turn out to be accurate, which I think there is still some question about. But I just think Dornoch's going to work out a good trip and Locke's going to have a little too much to do. But it wouldn't shock me the other way. I don't want to play a pick five where I'm using both of them. So I settled on Dornoch and I took the quirks into account. I just think he'll be a little more mature horse. And I like the fact that he'll probably get a little bit of an outside trip.
Yeah, when I made picks for this race, I put Locked on top. I would use both of these horses. I found myself struggling to separate them in here. And at the end of the day, I just thought Locked might be a slightly better price, though it's going to be close between these two. But I know some people got caught up in the narrative around Locked and the fact that he missed some training time. He had that fever. He was supposed to make his seasonal debut in the Sam Davis, and then he didn't work for a few weeks. And now we've been rerouted to this Fountain of Youth. Sometimes I think we can overanalyze all of that stuff when we're on the Derby trail, because normally, unless you're noticing the gap in the workout, sometimes you just wouldn't even be aware of things like that. Not to say that we should completely ignore information that we do have access to, and I think it's good information to at least consider. But with Locked, I did watch the return workout on February 16th at Palm Beach Downs, and I really liked what I saw. I thought it was even a better workout than we were seeing from him before that break in the works, when he was sort of paired with Fierceness and not working as well as that one. I really liked that workout on February 16th. He clearly was asked a little bit to get something out of it, but he really responded and had this super strong gallop out. So that was a real positive sign for me. And it sort of reminded me of how good this horse was as a 2-year-old. I mean, that maiden win at Saratoga was just absolutely dazzling. And I mean, especially considering how good Drumroll Please turned out to be after that. And I'm kind of unfortunate that he's exited the Derby trail, but he was a really nice horse for Brad Cox. And, Locked had to work maybe a little harder than you would have expected in that British Futurity, but boy, did he have a tough wide trip that day. And even in the Breeders' Cup, that race ended up not setting up for him at all. It was a much slower pace than I think we were anticipating on the way into that race. And he was never in good position, had to sort of pick his way through traffic, past some horses that were just spinning their wheels going nowhere. And he was finishing best of all at the end of that race. I think Locked was one of the best 2-year-olds from last year. And there's always that question, can they return or even improve on their form as 3-year-olds? I'm going to say that yes, he can. And yeah, maybe the trip is not going to work as well for him as it will for Dornoch. I don't know. If there's pace, I think Locked could be just fine. He won going this exact same configuration that Keeneland 2 back with a wide trip around the turn. He seems like he runs the turns pretty well. So I end up giving Locked the slight nod in this race, but for me, it's kind of splitting hairs between these two, and I just thought Locked might be a slightly better price. We'll see if I'm right about that.
Now, what do we do with the horses exiting the maiden special weight race on January 27th, to assuming that they're going to go here, Speakeasy and Victory Avenue? They ran fast, and there's only been one race come back, and that one's a couple horses come back in one race. They ran 1-2, so regardless of what you think of the speed figure, they were well beaten that day. It seems like it was a strong race, but they're stretching out the 2 turns. Victory Avenue is obviously still a maiden. But I think these horses will probably take some support. For me, these kind of horses are never for me. There was a while back in my betting career where I would fall for them because of big flashy speed figures. It's just such a big hurdle. I have a hard time taking horses like this.
Yeah, I think I learned some lessons when I picked Hidden Scroll in the Fountain of Youth a few years ago. These horses, it's just asking so much of them to stretch out in distance from maiden win, sprinting, especially in just the second starts of their careers, to a spot like this where they're facing 2 of the top early contenders for the Kentucky Derby that have all of that seasoning from their 2-year-old seasons. I just always want to favor those horses like Door Knock and Locked in this situation. And I do think Speakeasy and Victory Avenue are going to take money in this race off those big speed figures. I mean, Victory Avenue obviously was highly touted before that debut, actually going off at 3-2 compared to Speakeasy's 8-1, despite that difference in connections and the assumption that Todd Pletcher and Irad Ortiz are always going to take money. Well, it wasn't the case when these two debuted against each other, but it's not like they've got, even on the TimeformUS speed figure scale, it's not like they've got some big edge just based on the maiden win. And I think they're going to have to improve a little bit on the stretch out. And for me, it's just asking a little bit too much. If I had to decide between the two of them, I would slightly prefer Speakeasy, who to me, I think he ran better than Victory Avenue in that debut race. But still, I would almost rather see Speakeasy run on Friday, because I think you'll get a much better gauge of who he is in that allowance race, as opposed to just like throwing him to the wolves here, where he's drawn the inside and would have to be ridden too aggressively. And maybe he's got the natural ability to overcome it, but at what I think is going to be a relatively short price, I would much rather go with the proven experience in these kind of spots.
Yeah, we're in the same boat there. I'm actually hoping that he runs Friday. And if I had to pick between the two, I agree. I prefer him. I didn't see anything watching that race that would make me think he couldn't handle Victory Avenue going longer. So, but for me, I'm going to narrow it down to the other two. A horse I gave a brief look to was Frankie's Empire, who we saw win. I think it was on Holy Bull Day. He won the Swale Stakes really easily at a big price. Changed barns, jumped up his big speed figure. But when I went back and watched some of his other races, this horse just looks like a one-turn horse to me. I get taking a shot in here. He's tried 2 turns a couple of times, once at Delaware, once in Monmouth. Both times he was really backing up through the stretch. Now, granted, he didn't run very well on either of those occasions. Was a different barn. It was very earlier in his career, but even watching that Swale, I just get the impression he's a horse who is a one-turn horse.
Yeah, I agree about that. And while it's not really an observation for the purposes of this podcast, where we're handicapping a pick 5 sequence, if I'm playing trifectas in this race, my underneath horse is the number 9 Dancing Groom. I don't think he's really a candidate to win the race, but if some others don't show up and can't handle the test, like Speakeasy and Victory Avenue, I would much rather look at a price to get an underneath of Locked and Door Knock. And for me, that's Dancing Groom, who had no chance last time in the Holy Bull. He's the one that was most compromised by that glacial early pace. And he was actually really trying at the end, but just could never get in the mix, given how slowly they went early. And he ran okay in the Champagne as a 2-year-old. So there's some foundation to build on there. I don't think he's good enough to win the race, but he's the kind of horse I could use somewhere underneath.
Hey, I'm pretty sure that most of our listeners don't just play pick 5. So we will always listen to those thoughts. And I agree. He had those blue fractions, no chance, wide all the way around. So definitely a vertical player for me.
Well, let's do our recap, Craig. Going back over this, I think you said towards the top that there were a few spread races that you didn't really had trouble narrowing down, and some others where you want to go a little bit more thinly. I'm getting the sense that the thin races are the last 2, but I'll let you recap it.
Sure. Start out in race 10. This one I'm going to spread on. My top pick would be Cairo Consort, but I would still use horses like Sister Luann, Ready Lady. I mentioned the Roger Atfield stat, and also Miss Yearwood and R. Callie Kim, because they're deep closers, but it is a 1-3 ace. One of the races I'm going to narrow down is race 11, where most likely I'm only using Il Miracolo and Tumbarumba. Maybe I could be talked into using Wit if my ticket comes back short enough. Race 12, I would go back to spreading a little bit more. I would use Emmanuel and Siege of Boston as A's. Turf King would be more like a B. Giant Game, if he runs, he's going to be a big price, so I could use him as a C type in there. I wouldn't want to totally discount a horse like Smokin' Tea and maybe even Saratoga Flash if Giant Game does go in the other spot, as he would be lone speed. So just kind of watch the scratches for that. In race 13, this is a race I expect to really heat up on the front end. I think Chili Flag is way the horse to beat. I don't want to totally overlook Expansive, so I would use her more as a B type in this one. But Chili Flag would be the A for me. And then in the last race, the Fountain of Youth, I'm going to lean on Door Knock pretty heavily in this one. the more I thought about it and heard you talk, it's not like I like anybody else in here. So I could see using locked as a backup with some of the other prices that I have. I just don't want to use them both in equal strengths.
And for me, I'm sort of afraid this ticket's going to get a little expensive because I was having trouble narrowing some of these races down, particularly that first leg, which at least if you take a shot and you're really wrong, I guess you have to pick four at your disposal. But in this, the very one, I ended up liking Miss Yearwood enough that I wanted to use her as an A, even though I'm worried about the pace. And I guess my A's in this race would be the 7 and the 8, she and Cairo Consort. And then the horses that I would use as more B's would be Ready Lady, Sister Luann, R. Kelly Kim. R. Kelly Kim I could have used as an A. I just feel like she's not going to be the right kind of price, especially if she does go favorite in here. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about that race, but that was sort of the most difficult race for me to slot horses into those A, B, and C positions. In the Gulfstream Park Mile, the 11th, I would want to go 3 deep in here to Wit, Il Miracolo, and Tumbarumba. If I had to rank them, it would probably be more along the lines of Craig, like 4, 5, 2. But if I can afford it, I'd like to use them all in somewhat equal strength because especially if it looks like Wit's going to be a fair enough price. If he's favored in doubles, I'll want to rethink that strategy. In the 12th race, the Canadian Turf, I'm going to try to narrow this one down to 3 horses, those being Emmanuel, Siege of Boston, and then my price horse, or at least I hope he's a price, the number 4, Turf King. They'd sort of be the 3 A's for me. And then, if I'm looking deeper, backups could be a horse like the number 9, Giant Game, or the number 10, Ice Chocolat. But this is a race where there's a temptation to start to use everybody, and I want to try to keep a lid on it. And I do think you should be aware of what we were mentioning when we're handicapping. If Giant Game scratches, you do want to consider upgrading the 1 Saratoga Flash, who we didn't like from a handicapping standpoint, but you don't want to let a horse wire on the front end beat you in a situation where he looks like such a lone speed. In the 13th race, this is where I'm going to go thinner. The number 6 Chili Flag, she's the lone A, and really my 2 backups would be the 4 Expansive and the 8 Mohawk Trail, who may be a little bit more of a vertical horse for me because I'm not totally convinced she's good enough, but she was sort of the one other value horse I could make a case for in there. And then closing things out in the Fountain of Youth, I really just want 2, Door Knock and Locked. If my ticket's looking like it's getting really expensive, I'll probably break them up and use Locked as the A and Door Knock as the B to sort of cut costs a little bit. But I'd like to get alive to both of them. And that brings us to the end of the handicapping portion of this podcast, Craig. I'm looking forward to this weekend quite a bit, not just due to this pick 5, but all of the stakes action that's supposed to take place around the country. We didn't talk about Aqueduct yet. I know we'll be doing a couple of stakes previews for Aqueduct on the DRF YouTube channel for this weekend, but I'm really looking forward, especially to that Gotham, which looked like it's going to be a really fun race to handicap. I'll be doing a separate video on that's also on DRF's channel. But looking forward to recapping it all with you next week because there should be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, unfortunately, we went a little long today, and I'm worried we might go even longer on the pace cast. So I'll cut it short with all the big racing coming up next week.
Well, everybody, that wraps up the podcast for this week. I want to remind everybody that it is tournament season at first, and the next big one is the Ultimate Betting Challenge on Saturday, March 2nd at Gulfstream, Santa Anita, and ExpressBet. The Ultimate Betting Challenge, or UBC, features every race at Gulfstream Park on Fountain of Youth Day and every race at Santa Anita Park on Big Cap Day, making it a true full-day coast-to-coast betting extravaganza. Buy-in is $6,000, of which $5,000 is your bankroll, and compete against players from around the country for massive cash prizes and NHC seats. First, we'll seed 4 NHC seats for the prize pool, and all cash entry fees will be distributed back as prizes. With 150 players, that's $150,000 in cash prizes, plus those 4 NHC seats. Play in the UBC on-site at Gulfstream or Santa Anita, or jump in online at ExpressBet. Head over to expressbet.com/tournaments for more information and to register to play. Well, everybody, thanks again for listening to the end of this long edition of the Timeform US Forecast, but hopefully we gave out some good ideas this week. Remember, you can always catch these DRF podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for listening to the end, and make sure to catch the Timeform US Pacecast coming up next week.